The rain poured steadily over the quiet streets of Seattle, wrapping the night in a soft, lonely rhythm. Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of thunder rolling far in the distance. The digital clock beside her bed blinked 11:42 p.m. She turned onto her side, pulling the blanket closer, trying to find warmth, not just for her body, but for her heart. Daniel, her husband, had been gone for nearly 3 weeks on a business trip. His work had taken him to New York, then Chicago, and now somewhere in Toronto. He called every few days, his voice polite but distant, always ending with, "I'll be home soon." But soon had begun to sound like a word that didn't mean anything anymore. The house felt too quiet, too big, and too empty. Emily had always loved the rain. It used to make her feel peaceful, especially when Daniel was home, when they would drink coffee together and talk about everything and nothing. Now it just echoed the silence she tried so hard to ignore. She missed the sound of his laughter, his footsteps, the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. But the truth was, even when Daniel was home, he was hardly present. Work had become his world. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and checked for messages. Nothing. With a sigh, she placed it back and closed her eyes. Maybe, she thought, if she could just fall asleep, morning would come faster. Just as she began to drift off, a sound startled her, a faint creak downstairs, followed by the sound of the front door closing. Her heart thumped. She froze for a moment, listening carefully. Another sound, this time footsteps, slow and careful. She sat up, holding her breath, every noise louder in the quiet house. Then, a familiar voice called softly from downstairs. "Emily, it's me, Ryan." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Ryan, Daniel's younger brother. She had completely forgotten he was supposed to arrive tonight. Daniel had mentioned it briefly on the phone, saying Ryan was visiting Seattle for work and would stay with her for a few days. He was arriving late. Daniel had said probably past 10. Emily quickly got out of bed, wrapped a cardigan around her shoulders, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway light flickered faintly as she stepped out. "Ryan," she called gently. "Yeah," came his voice, closer now. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. My flight got delayed again." She smiled faintly, relieved. "It's fine. I forgot you were coming tonight." He appeared at the top of the stairs, a travel bag slung over his shoulder, rain still glistening in his hair. He looked tired but smiled when he saw her. "Hey, Em." There was something familiar yet different about him. Ryan had always been kind, a little quieter than Daniel, more thoughtful. He'd visited often during their first years of marriage, but not much lately. Work had taken him to Portland, and life had gotten busy for everyone. "You must be freezing," Emily said softly. "Come in, I'll get you a towel." He chuckled. "I'm okay, really. It's glad to be out of that storm." She led him downstairs to the guest room and showed him where everything was. The air between them was comfortable but touched with a quiet awkwardness, the kind that comes when two people haven't seen each other in a while and don't know exactly how to begin again. Once he settled in, Emily returned to her room. She tried to sleep, but her thoughts wandered. Hearing another person in the house after so many nights alone felt strangely comforting. She could hear faint sounds from the guest room, drawers opening, footsteps, the muffled thud of a suitcase. It was normal, ordinary, yet her heart beat faster than it should have. As the minutes passed, she finally began to relax. The rain softened against the window, and the clock now read 12:25, just as her eyes began to close. She heard it, the gentle sound of her door creaking open. She turned slightly, half awake, half dreaming. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely above the sound of the rain. There was a pause. Then, his voice calm, low, apologetic. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "I thought I heard the window open." She blinked, a little dazed. "Oh, it's fine. Just forgot to lock it earlier. Do you want me to check it?" She smiled faintly in the dark. "That's okay. Go rest. You must be tired." "All right," he said softly. "Good night, Em." "Good night." The door closed gently. She listened to the sound of his footsteps fade down the hallway. The rain continued to tap against the glass, soft, steady, almost like a heartbeat. She turned to look at the window. It was half open indeed, the curtains swaying slightly with the wind. Emily reached out, closed it, and lay back down. She stared at the ceiling again, her mind wandering. She thought about Daniel, somewhere far away, probably still at work even at this hour. And then she thought of Ryan, how he had quietly checked on her, how his voice had sounded careful, kind, familiar. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. She closed her eyes again, listening to the rain, the faint hum of the heater, and the gentle quiet of the house. Slowly, she drifted off to sleep. In her dreams, the storm outside, blended with memories of laughter, warmth, and moments she hadn't felt in a long time. When she woke hours later, early morning light filtered through the curtains. And she wasn't sure if what she remembered was real or just a dream. The room was calm, filled with the soft scent of rain. Downstairs, she could hear faint movement. The sound of dishes, the hum of the coffee maker, and the distant voice of a man humming softly to himself. For the first time in many days, Emily smiled. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It was just morning, ordinary and simple, but it carried something new, something she couldn't name, but felt deeply. And as the rain began to fall again, outside, she whispered to herself, maybe this week won't be so lonely after all. She didn't know that this simple thought, this quiet sense of comfort, would lead to a turning point in her life. Not because of anything dramatic or forbidden, but because it would make her question what it truly meant to be seen, to be noticed, and to feel understood again. That night had changed something, not visibly, not loudly, but deeply. And though she couldn't see it yet, that gentle knock on her door in the middle of the storm was the beginning of a story she would never forget. Morning came softly. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Sunlight broke through the gray sky, slipping through the thin white curtains of Emily's room. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling that strange in-between space where dreams still linger. The air smelled of rain and coffee. Somewhere downstairs she could hear quiet movement, the sound of a cupboard opening, the gentle clink of a spoon against a mug. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and then it all came back. Ryan's late arrival, his soft voice in the hallway, the way he had quietly closed the door last night. She sat up, brushed her hair back, and felt a rush of nervousness. It wasn't because of anything wrong, but because she hadn't seen Ryan properly in years. And now he was here, in her house, filling the silence that had been haunting her for weeks. Emily slipped on a sweater and went downstairs. The kitchen was bright, filled with the scent of coffee and toasted bread. Ryan stood by the counter, his back turned, wearing one of Daniel's old sweatshirts. His hair was still slightly messy, and his eyes had that calm, kind look she remembered. He noticed her and smiled. "Good morning, Em. I made coffee. I hope that's okay." She smiled back, a little shyly. "It's more than okay. It smells perfect." Kay poured her a cup and handed it to her carefully. "You sleep all right?" "Eventually," she said, taking a sip. "It was a long night." "Yeah," he nodded. That storm was something else. They sat at the kitchen table, the kind of comfortable silence that only family or people who almost feel like family could share. Outside, the street still glistened with water, and birds chirped as if nothing had ever been dark or lonely. Emily studied him quietly. Ryan was a few years younger than Daniel, but carried himself with a certain calm maturity. Where Daniel had sharpness and confidence, Ryan had softness, a quiet steadiness that made people feel at ease. He had the same blue eyes, the same smile, but something about him felt warmer. "So," Emily said, trying to sound casual, "how's Portland treating you?" He chuckled. "Busy, too many deadlines, too many late nights. But it's fine." He looked at her. "You know how that goes?" She smiled, though there was sadness behind it. "Yes, I know it too well." They talked for a while about work, life, family, things that didn't matter much but filled the silence nicely. But then Ryan's tone softened. "You've been alone a lot lately, haven't you?" Emily looked down at her cup. "Daniel's work has him traveling a lot. I try not to think about it." He hesitated, his voice gentle. "You deserve someone who's here. Someone who listens." The words hung in the air. She didn't know how to respond. No one had said something like that to her in a long time. Daniel loved her, she knew that. But love had become quiet, something that existed but didn't speak anymore. She looked up and forced a smile. "It's okay. He's doing what he needs to do. I just wish it didn't feel so far." Ryan nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You always try to see the best in people. Daniel's lucky to have you." Emily didn't know why, but hearing that made her throat tighten. She wanted to say something back, but instead, she smiled faintly and stood to wash her cup. The warmth in Ryan's eyes lingered even as she turned away. The day passed quietly. The sky cleared, and by afternoon, sunlight stretched across the porch. Emily suggested they repaint the porch railing, something she had been meaning to do but never got around to. Ryan agreed right away. They worked together through the afternoon, laughing when the paint dripped or when the brush slipped. It felt simple, easy, almost like old times when life wasn't filled with missed calls and long-distance goodnights. Ryan told stories about his work, about the little coffee shop near his apartment that served the worst lattes but played the best music. Emily found herself laughing more than she had in weeks at one point. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and found Ryan watching her. He looked away quickly, but she noticed, and it made her heart skip. They finished painting just before sunset. The light was golden, glowing on their faces, and the air smelled like fresh rain and wood. Emily looked at the railing proudly. Not bad for one afternoon. Ryan smiled. "You always finish what you start." She laughed softly. "That's the goal." For a few seconds, they just stood there, the soft wind carrying the quiet between them. Emily looked at him, really looked, and realized how much he reminded her of the warmth Daniel used to have. She wasn't thinking anything she shouldn't. It was just comfort, familiarity, a reminder that someone could still look at her like she mattered, as the sun dipped below the trees. Ryan spoke quietly. "You know, when I was younger, I used to look up to you. You and Daniel seemed like the perfect couple. The way you two looked at each other, it made love seem easy." Emily's smile faded slightly. "It used to be easy. Then life got complicated." He nodded. "It always does." They both went quiet. The air felt heavier now, not in a bad way, just full of things unsaid. Emily could feel the weight of his words, the softness in his tone. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't simple either. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing at all. When they went back inside, the house felt warmer. Ryan helped her clean up the brushes and wash the paint from their hands. Their fingers brushed for a moment, brief, accidental, but enough to make her heart beat faster. Neither said a word about it. After dinner, they sat in the living room. Ryan watched a movie while Emily folded some laundry. The scene on the TV showed a couple walking through rain, holding hands, laughing like love was still new. Emily looked away, focusing on the shirts in her lap. When the movie ended, Ryan stood and stretched. "I think I'll turn in early. Long day." "Of course," she said, standing too. "Good night, Ryan," smiled softly. "Good night, Em." As he disappeared down the hallway, Emily stood still for a long moment. She could feel something shifting, something quiet and delicate, like a leaf turning in the wind. She didn't understand it, and maybe she didn't want to. She walked upstairs, changed into her nightclothes, and sat by the window. The sky outside was dark but calm. The rain had returned, not loud, just a soft drizzle. She watched it for a while, feeling a strange peace she hadn't felt in months. Downstairs, she could hear the faint sound of Ryan's footsteps. It was small, almost comforting, a reminder that someone else was there. Someone kind. Someone who noticed her and as she lay down that night. The last thought in her mind was simple but powerful, sometimes. The most dangerous feelings are the quiet ones, the ones that begin with kindness. Slip into warmth and stay in silence. She didn't know it yet, But the days ahead would test everything she thought she understood about love, loyalty, and the spaces in between. The next night arrived quietly, covered in a blanket of soft rain and distant thunder. The house glowed with a few warm lights, the kind that made everything feel softer and more intimate. Emily sat by the window, a cup of tea in her hands, watching drops of rain slide down the glass. The sky was dark, but the soft rhythm of the rain made her feel calm and restless. At the same time, it had been 2 days since Ryan arrived. The house no longer felt empty, but the stillness inside her hadn't fully gone away. Every moment with him felt comfortable, yet heavy with unspoken feelings. She kept telling herself it was nothing, just the joy of having company after weeks of loneliness. But every time their eyes met, she felt something stir that she didn't want to name. Ryan came into the living room quietly. He wore a gray sweater and jeans, his hair slightly damp from a quick shower. "You're still up," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. She smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep. The rain always keeps me awake." He walked closer, leaned against the wall, and nodded. "Same here. I tried reading, but it didn't help." Emily gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit, I'll make you tea if you want." He shook his head. "I'm good." "I just didn't want to sit in my room alone." They sat quietly for a while. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the rain against the windows. The air between them was filled with warmth and something unspoken, not romantic yet, but full of care. Like a thread quietly tying them together. After a few minutes, Ryan spoke. "You know, I've always liked this house. Feels alive. Daniel used to talk about how much you loved it." She smiled gently. "It was our first big dream together. We worked for years to get it." He nodded, then his voice softened. "You made it a home. I can see that. Everything here feels peaceful." Emily looked down at her tea. "Peaceful," she repeated softly. "That's one word for it." Ryan glanced at her, reading the sadness she tried to hide. "You miss him, don't you?" She sighed. "I do, but sometimes I think I miss who he used to be more than who he is now." Ryan didn't respond right away. He looked at her with quiet understanding. "People change," he said finally. "But sometimes they forget who they're changing with." His words hit deeper than she expected. She looked at him, really looked, and saw sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't trying to make her feel sorry for herself. He was just seeing her, really seeing her in a way she hadn't felt seen in a long time. "Ryan," she said softly, "you shouldn't say things like that. Makes things complicated." He smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to." But sometimes the truth doesn't wait for permission. Her breath caught for a moment. There it was again, that quiet honesty, the kind that made her heart ache. She stood pretending to tidy the side table just to look away from him. "I think I should sleep. It's late." He nodded, but she could feel his eyes on her as she walked toward the stairs. She turned once, just before reaching the top step, and saw him still sitting there, hands clasped, eyes lowered, lost in thought. For a moment, the distance between them felt like more than just a hallway. When she reached her room, she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. She told herself it was nothing, just an emotional moment shared between two people who were both lonely in their own ways. Still, as she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she couldn't ignore the faint blush on her face. The night dragged on. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look. She felt confused, not because of what had been said, but because of what hadn't. There was something in Ryan's eyes that lingered in her mind. Softness that reminded her of everything she once believed love was supposed to feel like. The rain grew heavier, tapping against the window like a song. She turned over, pulled the blanket tighter, and closed her eyes, trying to silence the rush of emotions. But then a soft knock on her door. Her heart jumped. She waited, unsure whether to answer. After a few seconds, Ryan's voice came through, quiet and careful. "Emily, are you awake?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Yes. Is everything okay?" I just wanted to make sure you locked the back door. It's storming hard and it was open earlier. Her shoulders relaxed. Oh, thank you. I'll check it. He paused, then said softly, You don't have to. I already did. There was silence after that. Neither of them spoke again. The sound of his footsteps faded, and she could hear him return to his room. She lay there in the dark, her heart beating fast. 'Twas such a simple gesture, checking the door, yet it carried a kind of care she hadn't felt in so long. Small thing, but powerful enough to make her eyes sting with quiet tears. In the morning, Ryan acted as if nothing had happened. He made breakfast, asked how she slept, and talked about his work plans for the day. Emily responded with smiles, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She caught herself watching him sometimes. How he laughed softly at his own jokes. How he noticed when she needed help without her asking. There was no wrong in it, but it felt dangerous in ways she couldn't explain. Later that day, she folded laundry. She saw a framed photo of her and Daniel taken years ago, both smiling wide, faces full of hope. She touched the edge of the frame, feeling a rush of nostalgia and sadness. That version of them felt so far away. When Ryan passed by the doorway and saw her holding the photo, he stopped. "That's a nice picture," he said. "It used to be my favorite," she replied quietly. "Now it just feels like a memory." He didn't say anything at first. Then, softly, he said, "Some memories are reminders, not of what's gone, but of what's still possible." His words stayed with her the entire evening. She thought about them while setting the table, while washing the dishes, and later as the rain began again outside. That night she sat by her window once more, just like before. The air felt heavy, filled with thoughts she didn't want to name. Down the hallway, she could hear Ryan moving around, getting ready to sleep. She knew she should rest too, but her heart refused to quiet down. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something real, something she hadn't felt in years. The simple comfort of being noticed, cared for, and understood without a single word. She closed her eyes and let the rain's rhythm carry her thoughts away. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but deep down, she already sensed that their time together was changing something inside her, something she couldn't undo. The morning was pale and quiet, the kind that follows a long storm. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. The world outside seemed calm, but inside Emily's chest, everything felt unsettled. She woke early, long before the alarm, and sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the soft light creeping through the curtains. Her thoughts were heavy with everything that had been left unsaid between her and Ryan. Downstairs she heard movement, footsteps, the closing of a suitcase, the sound of car keys jingling. Her heart sank a little. He was leaving. She knew. He would. He had mentioned going back to Portland before Daniel's return. Still, hearing it happen felt different too soon. To final dot, Emily put on her robe and walked downstairs. Ryan was standing by the front door, his bag beside him, looking over the house one last time. The living room was bathed in morning light, and for a moment it looked like a photograph, one she would never forget. "You're up early," he said quietly, noticing her. "I heard you moving around." She replied, her voice softer than usual. "You're leaving already?" He nodded. "Yeah, thought I'd get on the road before traffic." She crossed her arms lightly, trying to hide the ache in her chest. "You could have stayed for breakfast. I would have made something." He smiled faintly. "You already did more than enough, Em. Thank you for letting me stay." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was nice having company again. The house felt alive. They stood there in silence for a few seconds, both unsure what to say next. There was so much between them now. Not love, not anything forbidden, but a deep understanding that had grown quietly over those few days. An understanding that words couldn't really explain. Ryan looked around the living room again, his eyes landing on the small things that made the house feel like home. The framed pictures, the soft rug, the scent of freshly brewed coffee. "Daniel's lucky," he said finally. "Not just for this home, but for you. You make things better just by being in them." The words hit her like a soft wave, kind, simple, but carrying weight. Emily swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "You don't have to say that. I mean it," he said. "You've always been the one who keeps everything together. Even when things fall apart, you still manage to make it feel okay." Her eyes met his, and for a second, time seemed to stop. It wasn't romance, not the kind found in movies or songs. It was something gentler to people who had found a small moment of peace in each other's company. She stepped closer, then stopped, unsure how to say goodbye. "You take care of yourself, okay? Oh, don't work too hard." He smiled. "I'll try. You too." When he reached for his bag, she noticed his hands tremble slightly. He turned toward the door, but before he opened it, he looked back. His expression was calm, but his eyes said more than his words ever could. "Emily," he said softly, "if life ever feels too heavy, don't forget you still have people who care about you. You don't always have to be strong alone." Her throat tightened. "Thank you, Ryan." He nodded once, gave a small smile, and walked out into the cool morning air. Emily followed him to the porch, hugging her arms against the chill. The driveway was still damp from the rain, and his car shone faintly in the early light. He placed his bag in the trunk and turned one last time. "Tell Daniel I said goodbye," he said. "I will," she whispered. Then he got into the car, started the engine, and drove away slowly. Emily watched until his car disappeared down the foggy street. When he was gone, the silence that returned felt heavier than before. She stood there. For a long moment, the sound of distant birds mixing with the faint echo of her heartbeat. Finally, she went back inside. The house felt too still again, the kind of stillness that reminded her of what had been lost, not just with Daniel, but with herself. She made coffee, sat by the window, and stared at the porch they had painted together. The paint was dry now, the color bright and fresh against the sunlight. It was a small thing, but it held a memory, laughter, warmth, connection. Later that week, Daniel came home. His return was as expected, quick, polite, and wrapped in exhaustion. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, and started talking about work before he even put down his suitcase. Emily listened, smiled where she should, and said all the right things. "How was Ryan's visit?" Daniel asked casually that evening while scrolling through emails on his phone. "Good," Emily replied. "He helped around the house. It was nice having him here." "That's good," Daniel said, his tone distant. "It's a good guy." She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Yes," she said quietly. "He really is." He didn't notice the pause in her voice. His attention was already on his screen, typing replies to messages that couldn't wait. Emily watched him for a while, wondering when exactly the distance between them had become normal. That night, when Daniel finally fell asleep beside her, Emily turned toward the window. The sky was clear, stars scattered like tiny sparks. The same window Ryan had once checked during the storm. She smiled faintly at the thought, not in longing, but in quiet gratitude. Ryan's visit had reminded her of something she had forgotten, how it felt to be noticed, to be valued, to have someone truly listen. He hadn't changed her life, but he had reminded her what it meant to feel alive again in the weeks that followed. Emily started to change small things. She began painting again, something she hadn't done in years. She joined a local book club, started walking in the evenings, and called her old college friend just to talk. Little by little, she began to rebuild the parts of herself she had buried beneath routine and loneliness. She didn't tell Daniel everything, not about the quiet nights by the rain or the words that still echoed softly in her heart. It wasn't because she was hiding something wrong. It was because some moments were meant to stay unspoken. Not out of guilt, but because they were too human, too honest, and too fleeting to be put into words. Months later, on another rainy evening, Emily found a postcard in the mail. It was from Portland. A photo of the coast, gray skies meeting the blue ocean. On the back, in Ryan's handwriting, it simply said, "The rain still reminds me of that week. Hope you're smiling again." Emily smiled as she held the card. The rain tapped gently against the window, just as it had that night. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel lonely. She felt at peace, and though life went on, as it always does. That brief chapter stayed quietly in her heart, not as regret, but as a reminder. Sometimes the people who enter your life unexpectedly don't stay forever, but they leave behind something that changes you forever.